Arc 6, The Corridor of Memories. Chapter 85, Good Loser. The greatest knight, to name himself so entailed courage. He indeed took pride in being called so, extolled so by others. However, never had there been even a single instance wherein he had labeled himself as the utmost finest. He possessed the conceit of having lived days of stockpiling unsparing hard work and diligent devotion to learning. However, in his incompetent and inexperienced destiny, he was not but surrounded by unending excelling pioneers, comrades commanding respect, and juniors worthy of admiration. Though vexing, he considered that to be bliss. To be acknowledged by someone ought to be reward for strenuous efforts and diligence. Much less, in the endeavor to be acknowledged by everyone, the strenuous efforts and diligence must be such devotion that they are regarded as extraordinary, that everybody is amazed by solely those. Had his self truly worked hard enough to be worthy of that? He certainly did possess the conceit of having lived days of stockpiling unsparing hard work and diligent devotion to learning. However, did he transcend boundaries? Did he polish and refine oneself every day until he had exhausted all of his strength? Inspired by the strenuous efforts of others, did he pledge further hard work to his ideals? He shall answer his own question by himself. Julius Juculius had indeed accomplished that. Transcending boundaries, polishing and refining oneself until he exhausted all of his strength, with inspiration from the strenuous efforts of others he pledged further hard work to his ideals. Hence, before the existence who stood as the pinnacle of the sword, he held his head high with confidence. Julius, I am the greatest knight, Julius Juculius. The sword of the kingdom, that shall slash you down. Read. Grasping the hem of his mantle, Julius bowed, and ahead of him, the sword saint stood silently. He closed his other eye, which was not concealed by the eye patch, and did not look at Julius. But, silently bracing his bulky, burly arms, he pondered about something. However, his pondering did not last for long. By simply their short fellowship until now, it was clear that he was the one to possess the disposition of being utmost unsuited to ponderation. Thus, read, away a bloody hell. With an intense scratch of his head, the sword saint Reed potently stomped the floor once. Upon that singular blow, the clear floor of the second layer quaked as if fissuring. Though Echidna, who was watching over the confrontation of the two, drew her body back, Julius stood firm, unwavering. Witnessing that, Reed clicked his tongue with a TCH. Reed, appearances. Yeah, appearances I. You really do be speaking shit like my follower. What an insufferable bastard you. Julius, though unfortunately I am not acquainted with him, I must offer my sympathies to the man whom you say is your follower. Reed, ha? Who the hell said my follower's a dude? Talking bastards round ain't gonna be amusin' in the first place. The follower I'm talkin' about's a woman. She's got a nice face, but damn's her reason in annoyin' it. Julius, a female. Then, what is the similitude between myself and her which you speak of? Reed, don't ya make me say it gain and gain. As wrinkles appeared on his snout, Reed expressed a ferocious smile akin to a shark. And, unfastening the locked fold of his arms and knocking his cheeks with his hands. Reed, stenchy reasonin' and havin' a good face. Julius. Reed, hell, so you won't even get irritated. Damn uncute. Well, es fine. Snorting his nose in response to Julius' destitute reaction, Reed magnificently crackled the bones of his neck. Afterwards, through his blue eye, he observed Julius, no, not merely Julius, but his environs too. The quivering fleeting lights seemingly encircling Julius, their brilliance had strengthened compared to what it was earlier. Above all, this would be his first time making these girls' debut before Reed this way. Julius, my buds. No, my lovely maidens, do you perhaps have anything to object regarding them? Reed, nothin'. Nice women ain't of any regard to their race. Unfortunately, I ain't interested in women I can't sleep with. You would have grown stronger had you broken your shell, you know? Julius, if you say so, then a path like that certainly may have existed. Something like offering advice to juniors was fickleness unimaginable considering Reed's personality. For him to have done so must be due to Reed's own moodiness and in deeming Julius' desperate form, who not but clung to sword, to be wasteful. If you are going to cling to the sword anyways, then take a stance paying no heed to appearances. That had been the attitude and resolve he sought for Julius, and that too had been a realizable path. However, Julius, I decided to walk this path. Or possibly, instead bearing what is my true self, as you say, may make me stronger. Julius was aware that should he himself not be powerfully conscious of it, he would naturally become that way. A sudden instant, a narrow exchange of blows, should a solitary bit of his rind distinguish between life and death, that the face of the true Julius would come out. However, that spoke of a scenario wherein he would not be powerfully conscious of it. He shall no longer waver. Julius, hereby I declare. I shall think through myself as a knight. Furthermore, instead of the path you tried to guide me to, I shall become myself who excels in all fronts. Read, the hell kinda reasonin' makes you say you're gonna be doing that, you. Julius, it is obvious. The knight I lay my trust in is the personification of ideals. He is noble, just, and stronger than any other. Then, it is inevitable that I, who name myself as a knight, must be that way as well. Read, Even by his own word, a ludicrous reasoning, an illogical line of argument and claims, high-handed arbitrariness, a natural subject of ridicule. However, even if Reed overtly expressed his rage upon hearing that, he simply displayed his sharp fangs and laughed, directing no disgust or disdain whatsoever. And Reed, gonna make you cry. Articulating so, Reed tossed aside the chopstick he held, and before Julius, who was gazing in wonder, took a great leap towards the rear and stood back. Subsequently, he steadily extended his hand towards the side. What his huge palm was gripping to was the stipulated sword planted into the white layer. Reed Astrea, originally supposed to have merely lent his existence as the trial taker of the watchtower. By some twist of fate, he detached the arrangement of the tower through intense self-consciousness, and finally, by overriding the flesh body of the rating sin Archbishop of Gluttony, had fulfilled even a pseudo revival. In this position whereby he did not need to abide by the tower's trial, only then did Reed draw out the stipulated sword for the first time, abiding by his original role. Namely, Julius, gain his forgiveness, by hand of the fool who has reached the heavenly sword. Reed, that's my line you know. Well, though I totally forgot about it. Julius, I thought so, thus I stated it in your stead. I challenge you. Reed, like hell I'd give you forgiveness, you dunce. Gonna make you cry ugly. Before Julius, who had his knight's sword braced in his front, Reed crudely pointed the sword he had drawn out. No intervals, whatsoever. Assuming a relaxed stance, having reached the extremes, the ultimate swordsman. The pinnacle of all who wielded the sword Saint Reed Astrea. Julius, and now. Read, however you'd like. Julius, en garde. Placing faith in the chivalry shaping oneself, Julius Juculius tackled the sword saint with the entirety of his might. Both his body and heart felt light. In a non-figurative sense, that was the might of enhancement enveloping Julius as he swung the knight's sword. Needless to say, the stability of mind had an immense influence in battle. Upon consideration, to state Julius had been in an insecure condition ever since he had arrived at this Pleiades watchtower, no, ever since he had gotten his self's name plundered in the Watergate city, would be unerring. Of course, Julius admonished and restrained his own self as much as possible, forbidding it from showing on his face. Self-control anyone would appraise as akin to rationality of steel, however, it was not something that had been praised. Furthermore, forbidding the inferior form of his self from showing on his face, the consequence of having deceived his comrades and even his own self, had led to the unsightly defeat of consecutive losses ever since their arrival at this tower. Julius ought to have placed his trust in others, to begin with. Losing his presence of mind due to the impact of having the existence of his self forgotten, whilst merely pitying his self who had been broken off from the other person's world, he failed to notice what he should have placed faith in the utmost. Were the people whom Julius cherished, whom he trusted in, whom he had pledged his loyalty to, whom he had entrusted his back to, such humans who would simply disregard Julius Juculius, who had been broken off from their world without their notice? Absolutely not, he could assert so. Hence, what Julius ought to have done had been simply one thing. Appealing with sincerity, he should have indicated his affection by his volition. The way he had done so, with his buds. Julius, I should have retied the severed bonds. One who is nobody, can become anybody. For nobody but I myself am I living witness to that. The child of a commoner who was nobody had become even the utmost attractive and cool knight in this world. Julius, who had become nobody, was supposed to have become somebody once again. And Julius, no matter how many chances should I be given, I would surely still be charmed by the seemingly blazing young man that day, perceive ideals on the back of one who stood for the knight, and challenge you, the pinnacle of the sword after all. Reed, blabberin' about shit, damn cheeky of you. Upon Julius' decapitating slash, who had his determination set on the tip of his sword, Reed bellowed whilst matching in with the same sword strikes. As the entirety of his body lay subject to those sword moves and sword might, Julius straightened his yellow-hued eyes and felt wonder. Restarts included, this would be the fourth time he was battling Reed this way. The first challenge, and the immediately subsequent defeat. This time, with moreover the confinement of the narrowed watchtower's entirety, and having successfully recontracted with his buds, was the fourth time. Within all of this, Reed using a weapon aside from chopsticks, though referring to chopsticks as a weapon had exceeding room for doubt. Anyhow, him swinging something aside from chopsticks would be for the first time. And in these moments, with the pinnacle of the sword saint having wholly gripped the sword, he thought, Julius, your sword power hasn't changed, compared to the time you were using chopsticks. Reed, like I just said, damn it. The reason I'm strong ain't cause I swing the sword. The only reason I'm strong is just cause I'm strong. Defending against the sword strikes being casually swung down overhead, once his knees creaked, a pursuit aimed for him from directly below. Narrowly tiding over the attack he had borne witness to for the first time, Julius flew towards the rear upon the impact. Reed trailed that, not by breaking into a pursuit, but by simply taking a few long steps. Though one would grow to suspect his peculiar gait, there was nothing special about it. By merely stepping forth upon the thought of catching up with the drawn-back opponent, readily inventing and realizing a new form of gait unlike any of its previously existing schools was simply Reed's ability. Just as Reed himself had averred it, that was simply a matter of his norm-exceeding existence. Reed, do you want to cry now? Julius. No, the feeling of challenging a legend is livening up my chest. Not a bluff, Julius responded with truthfulness whilst being impelled. Yes, that was true. The one before his eyes was Reed Astrea. By his legends, simply how many times had Julius had gotten his heart throbbing, eyes twinkling, and had admired him, yearned for him. Meeting that person in reality, though he had been precisely astonished by his personality, his strength had been the very ideals he admired and yearned for. Henceforth, simply how wasteful had his self been in what he engaged in. All whilst possessing the opportunity to exchange words, exchange swords, exchange beliefs and conviction with him. Julius, ha! Whilst crossing swords with the genuine one, Julius exhaled upon the arrival of an unforeseen thought. Exceedingly out of place, however, the anticipation made his heart throb, truly delightful and piquant. Reed, the hell ya smilin' bout? Julius, nothing, a thought simply dawned on me. Once I fulfill my objective here and return to the service of my lord, that I shall challenge my friend, Reinhardt. Julius pronounced his idea upon Reed's inquiry. Never even once had Julius competed against Reinhardt in their sword skills until now. On the contrary, before it was determined that they would be in differing camps in the royal election, the idea of vying with each other over anything at all had never occurred to him. The regret of never having attempted to gain an equal standing. That too, had been one of the reasons why Julius served Anastasia, and faced in the royal election. However, even had he not possessed those sentiments, Julius still would have been enchanted by Anastasia's immense talent, wished to see the same dreams as her, and stood at the same place. Thus, from the very beginning, never had he been in need of dull excuses or roundabout stances. From the very beginning, he simply should have taken 2 wooden swords and headed over to Reinhardt. Once in the past, Reinhardt and the strongest swordsman of the Wallachia Empire had crossed swords. That day, when everyone in the parade ground had possessed wild enthusiasm toward the atmosphere of the sword, Julius too felt warmth in his chest. For that had been the answer. Reed, ha, that's a name I ain't ever heard of. Who the hell's this nobody? Julius, he is your descendant. And, along with being the present-day sword saint, my friend. Reed, the kid of my kid, just an outsider by that point goddamn. I ain't gonna notice him even if I see him by some roadside. Intertwining sword moves and kicking moves, Reed elucidated his irresponsibility whilst snorting his nose. Finding faint refutation in that dissertation, Julius attempted to open his mouth whilst exchanging swords. Reed, I'm startin' to get fed up of talking about outsiders. Do you wanna have a damn chat with me? Julius. Though I will not deny that, I shall deny. Reed. Julius, if only there was the time, I would have liked to exchange words with you, let it be for 2 days or for 3 days. However, at present the time for that purpose, regrettably, does not exist. Telling me to make haste, my back is being pushed. Thus. With distance opened in between, Reed lifted his cheeks whilst viewing Julius. In Reed's blue eye was Julius' form, augmenting its luminosity. The swirling 6 colored lights intermingled, gently commencing to paint an aurora, a rainbow. And Julius, Alplazeria. The radiance of the emitted rainbow swept a conquering white world towards Reed. Julius himself widened his eyes as well, upon the emitted aurora's span and might. As of now, that was maximal spirit arts transformed to a magic of extraordinary scope, with it being treated the same as before, now inviting discourtesy. Buds, no, he shall not refer to those girls, who had verbatim made their occluded gift and talent bloom, as buds. Those girls, who had achieved growth capable of being perceived as sublime, with beauty, with charm, with heroism, with dignity, vividly, were not buds but maidens. To monopolize those girls entirely to himself, as all 6 of them exhibited their respective glamour, may have made him a sinner greater than the sin archbishops. However, Julius, even if you all forget me, I love you all. As though to catch up with the emitted aurora, Julius stepped ahead. The radiance of rainbow clad in 6 elements broke through all shields and shattered the target. Hence, before the rainbow-colored light, the options left for the opponent were merely to take up the gauntlet or to evade. Reed, ha! And in accordance with his personality, Reed Astrea shan't dodge the radiance of rainbow. Responding to the radiance of rainbow surging forward in front, Reed raised his burly arms and slashed down the sharp edge of the imperial stipulated sword he was gripping to. With no reliance on special magic or divine protections, a sword move named as pure violence in a sole swing, that was what expunged the maximal magic Julius had fired with all of his might. However, that too had been factored in by Julius, as he paced ahead. Vaulting ahead from the rear of the expunged aurora, Julius borrowed the strength of his sword and his maidens. Julius, IA. Arrow. Upon that instant, the red and green spirits responded to the call and unified their strength. The wind formed a whirlpool around the blazing flame, generating a tornado of incandescence at Reed's feet. Sensing the coil of the heat wave underneath, Reed nimbly escaped upwards before being scorched. However, only now did the linkage of the spirit knight of the greatest knight commence. Julius, qua. Ik. The yellow spirit yielded a protuberance on the clear floor, propelling Julius' frame further upward. Simultaneously, the glow of the blue spirit glaciated the moisture in the air, hindering Reed's ascent, who had jumped upwards. Clicking his tongue, Reed inverted his stance through an evidently beyond human deed of stomping the air, and stationed his legs onto the ceiling of ice-generated midair, scowling at Julius whilst upside down. Firm strength poured into Reed's arm, and an interception aimed for the ascending Julius. Julius, in. Ness. In the juncture wherein the Sword Saint's counterattack drew near him, the white and black spirits intermeddled with the world with their respective powers. The white light bestowed strength upon the entirety of Julius' build, the black light weakened the might of Julius' enemy however meagerly. The paltry differentiation born in those moments was a central figure in the immediately following outcome. Reed. With the ice ceiling turned foothold shattering to fragments, Reed's hurled form blurred due to his velocity. The artless stance of the stipulated sword launched a certain type of a lengthwise and crosswise stab of the ultimate kind. Sensing it not as a menace, Julius held his chest steady and confronted it. The withstanding truth was that upon the crossing of a sword slash and a sword slash, the stronger side repelled the other. Thus, Julius opened his eyes. The eyes which had continually, perpetually watched that which proceeded upwards, proceeded forwards. Julius. Killing the very concept of sound and light, Reed's flash cleaved space. He shall affirm. Should it be the stipulated sword or the chopsticks, regardless, come what may in that flash's path, it shall be slashed down. For that was the very manifestation of the notion of the sword. The sword is that which is brought forth for the purpose of slashing objects down. And sword moves was the term denoting the techniques for slashing objects down with that sword. Henceforth, the flash which slashed down all of objects in the world was the culmination and the long-cherished original desire of the sword in sword moves. Those slashed by it shan't forget the truth of having been slashed down for eternity. Thus, the scar Julius Juculius sustained beneath his left eye shall not fade away for eternity. That was the indemnification for having dodged the Sword Saint's flash from a distance near enough to graze past. Julius. Renouncing his receiving stance, he perceived through the opponent's sword with momentary offense and defense. The slashed fundus of his eye spouted blood. However, he shall not close his eyes. Maintaining his focus on the opponent, he swung his arm. Reception renounced, he rained 100 flashes with offense. Julius al Clarista. The greatest ever sword strike of Julius Juculius painted the colors of a rainbow. It captured the smile of Reed Astrea, ferocious like that of a shark. The eye patch concealing the left eye of the Sword Saint was pierced by the night strike as it swayed into the air. Julius. The instant he descended upon the clear floor with his toes, he sensed the echo of footsteps to be frightfully blaring. The moment he became conscious of that, Julius' heart, in the depths of his chest, having forgotten to beat, commenced movement in panic. Subsequently turning towards the rear, he gazed at the burly spine facing towards him. Reed. His red long hair jolting, the back stood firm and still. The great man gripped to the stipulated sword in his right hand, and his left hand was positioned at his face. The spot which that left hand was touching, therein originally was supposed to be an eye patch, but currently it was absent. The eye patch that concealed the left eye of the Sword Saint, at present, had fallen at Julius' feet. Julius, so it connected, His voice quivered as he looked down upon the eye patch fallen on the clear floor, and the night sword in his own hand. Though his whisper sought to affirm the occurred happenings, it possessed an excessive lack of connection to reality. To him, this seemed as though a transient dream, that this all would slip away and vanish through his fingers. However, through not the notion of words, the six lights extolled Julius' established achievement. The warm flowers named his beloved, sought to fill the void born in Julius' heart. And accompanying the commend of his blooming maidens, Echidna, Julius. Hearing the soft voice, Julius turned his gaze towards its direction. The great man with his spine turned towards him, the maidens transmitting commend, overlooking the battle from a locus disparate from either of them, having called to Julius, was a female with light purple hair. With a face identical to that of his lord, whom he cherished, whom he pledged to dedicate his sword to, the artificial spirit who shall live for eternity, with whom he had a relationship of unknowingly mutually wounding each other. Whether the reason for her solicitude for Julius was because she cherished Anastasia, or due to the functioning of his divine protection of gathering spirits, the answer remained veiled. However, the being of someone who watched over the resolution of Julius Juculius eased his heart to such an extent, he thus hauled up his night sword in gratitude. Julius. Wordlessly, he hoisted his night sword up towards the heavens. Remnants embellished with the aurora glistened, the path of the sword verbatim delineated a rainbow. That was surely akin to blessings showered upon the knight named Julius Juculius. Read, had this been the shitty bloody trial, this would have made for your victory. Articulating so, the great man steadily stomped on the floor in a tangent. Once he turned around, no wound lay visible on Reed's face. What the tip of Julius' sword had reached had evidently been merely his eye patch. However, neither was even Reed shameless enough to exaggerate so and say it did not reach him. Above all, his prior remark had not been his unwillingness to admit defeat, but the truth. Had this indeed been the continuance of the trial of Pleiades Watchtower's second layer Electra, at the point of having a single blow connect successfully, Julius would have passed it and gained the right to challenge the upper stratum. However, the battle between Julius and Reed was no longer a question of the tower's trials. They were battling in order to settle this between a soul knight and a soul swordsman, a man and a man. Reed. Having lost his eye patch, Reed, with both of his eyes awakened, gripped the stipulated sword with both of his hands. Clutching the sword's grip, he braced the sword with the eye at its aim. Yes, so braced the sword saint. Not for artlessly swinging sticks, but braced the sword in order to slash the enemy down, with certainty. Reed, don't be complainin' even if you vanish to nothin'. Julius, even if I were to wish to complain, it would be difficult to find a way to do so when I would possess no mouth to complain from. Reed, ha! Rascal, ain't even gonna laugh at jokes, goddamn. You, what's your name gain? Julius lifted his eyebrows, upon being inquired for his name by the legend. Though he had assuredly named himself on countless instances before him by now, he did not possess recollection of that. However, him not having recollection of that was now insignificant. For he apprehended that with this question, Reed had indisputably, for the first time, acknowledged Julius. Julius Juculius. Since it is a name easy to forget, I requested you to remember it. Pronouncing a redundant remark he would not have perceived as humor simply a short duration ago, Julius pointed the vanguard of his nightsword towards Reed as well. And once again, he implored for the aid of the six spirits who had not but labored for him immediately previously. Should it be his present self and these girls, then he shall surely reach to farther heights of the rainbow's aurora. Al Clausiria and Al Clarista. Borrowing the might of the six spirits, the rainbow's aurora furling the power of the six elements. Clausiria, which fired that maximal magic, and Clarista, which made it dwell upon the night sword. A secret ritual further beyond, which he had not once succeeded in due to his inexperience. Julius, hereby I vanquish. Reed, come. In that juncture, an aurora submerged the white space, the bands of rainbow tackled the great man of crimson. The original rainbow spirit arts devised by Julius Juculius, a secret amongst its secrets. Neither launching the light of rainbow furling the six elements, nor making it dwell upon the sword, but cladding oneself in it, and exterminating the opponent by becoming the aurora itself. Julius, Al Clanver. That superlative strike of the spirit knight was directly assailed upon by a clear white flash. From the very beginning until the very end, the transcendent dimension of offense and defense far surpassed the ability of an untrained eye to keep pace with it. Needless to speak of the colliding sword strikes, but the bewildering interchange of positions and footwork, which side was dominating and which side lay inferior, even that alone could not the pale cerulean eyes capture. That was, entirely regardless of this flesh body not being her original belonging. Merely, there present were those who were vying for a matter of life and death within that dimension, and compared to them, the world she lived in simply was an exceedingly lesser dimension, that being withstanding truth. If the sense of worth and values of living beings reposed in their might as living creatures, then herself was frail, pertinent to worthlessness. Moreover, that was also the evidence of herself having lived for a time equating multiple centuries in indolence, with her back turned towards the path of enhancing, uplifting oneself. Ever since she first became cognizant of herself, she had the hunch that the purpose of the unnatural existence named herself had been fulfilled the very moment she had taken birth. If anything, taking birth itself had been her purpose, and the purpose had been fulfilled at that point of occurrence. Henceforth, left as is, she purposelessly wandered the world, unable to evade the void of multiple centuries. She did not mind even if she died. However, she merely possessed no reason to die. Thus, delaying her demise in inactivity, for much too long, she indulged in sloth. And during her course of prolongation, she had happened upon the young girl. Enchanted by the way of the young girl leading a vivid way of life, her glaciated life attained warmth. The young girl who possessed a diminutive frame and spoke implausible big talk, whom would she turn out to be, or would she be unable to become whomsoever, she yearned to bear witness to that with her own eyes. And before one could take notice, such intrigue and interest of hers became insignificant. I don't want to lose you, or the children you cherish. She was aware that what was termed as flowing time was kind yet cruel. Though time healed wounds, it also rendered emotions obsolete. Having lived for a long, lasting period of time, she newly mused that she did not want to forfeit this to the past. Though that too is an impossible wish. Even if she implored for it to stop, time evanesced all without halt. Lives, bound to possess minuscule and feeble lifetimes, displayed all kinds of changes within their time. Just as the nameless knight, who had his name plundered, who remained in the memories of no one, proved that he was a singular human named Julius Jaculius. The knight, clad in the radiance of rainbow, plunged directly into the white light. Against Julius, who gambled upon and unveiled the secret ritual, Redistria's actions were terribly simple. To swing down the sword he had swung up, a deed of sword strikes likely repeated the most in this world. It obliquely bisected the world, becoming a light which wrecked all in its path to ruin. Neither a special magic, nor a special move. With a mere swing of the sword, the world was scorched with the light. Unintelligible. Whether Redistria exceeded norms, or if all sword saints were such. Though what was certain was Julius. That she wished to devote her strength, such that the aurora would not be outpushed by the absurd white light. That was indubitably her genuine motive, however. An act like directly interfering into that battle, prior to being suicidal, would be uncouth, and that sin would not bequeath her even the right to complain should even her soul be shattered in repentance. And, the young girl Echidna, was aware that herself could not do anything. In this place, if there was anything she could do for Julius Jaculius, who had transformed into the aurora. Her hand on her slim chest, she sensed the existence slumbering in its depths. The original possessor of this flesh body, the reason why she would not awaken from her deep slumber in its search, Echidna had arrived at this tower of the sand sea. However, that had been deceit. Echidna was already aware of the reason why she would not wake up. The girl who declaimed her greed, who boasted her desire to attain all kinds of everything. Never letting go of what she had once put in purse, come what may, since she utmost loathed having to let go, having to part ways with anything, there was only one sole reason which she could reckon. Having ceded the body over to me, and temporarily lying dormant in your OD, you are in a state wherein you won't receive any interference from the outside world. Because the OD is a certain kind of eigenworld. And by her own volition, she had secluded herself away in that place. The reason being obvious. Should she come outside, she would incur the effects. The abhorrent authority of the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, she would incur its effects. She would forget what she wished to never forget, relinquish what she wished to never relinquish. Anastasia Hashin would forget Julius Jaculius. So was her purpose. However, it seems, everybody who came to this tower are all staunch boneheads. All of them appear to be uncute to the point of dying dwelling over losing something. In this duration of nearly 2 months, she had attempted to imitate her way by herself, but now was the right time. Besides, since she had observed his positives and negatives, his flurrying self as a nameless knight from close vicinity, even if that girl was to forget, she could apprise her. Ah, is that so? Wielding no purpose, the artificial spirit who had fulfilled its duty upon the point of taking birth. Though she had judged she wielded solely that unpleasant duty, contrary to expectations, that was not where it came to an end. The young girl she cherished, the knight she cherished, and acting as the intermediating bridge between the chip two. Was that honest not a task of vital significance? Was that not of such vital significance, that she could smile musing this had been the purpose of her birth? Thus, Echidna, to not even see your knight be at his coolest, a deed so wasteful, is it not unbecoming of your miserly self? The white light hunted the aurora down as though to paint it out. Furthermore, he pressed, with the entirety of his soul, and having borrowed the might of the 6 spirits he had reforged his contract with. He had gambled upon and unveiled a secret amongst secrets, whilst the opponent had merely swung the sword earnestly, solemnly. Indeed, he was utterly astounded by that absurd exceeding of norms. Simultaneously, since he also possessed the emotions enunciating this is how it must be overflowing within his chest, he found his own self to be irredeemable as well. With a swing of the sword, the world fissured. That was the special move of the sword saint which transpired when Reinhardt swung the sword as well. Suddenly, in the midst of a rivalry between a life and a life, Julius contemplated. Reinhardt and Reed, should they battle each other, simply who would prevail as more powerful? A legend and a legend, a sword saint and a sword saint, in the unattainable battle, who would be declared victorious? Unfortunately, the opportunity to make certain of that shan't pay a call. Julius, then I have no choice, but to confirm it with this body of mine. The opportunity to exchange swords with Reinhard van Astria with all Reed Astria befell only upon ones who reached this tower. Moreover, the possibility existed solely for Julius, and the young girl named Emilia, who would head towards the upper stratum. He bore no intention to concede that duty to anyone else. Thus, what remained for him was to simply triumph. To jostle this white light and slay Reed Astria with the radiance of rainbow. For that purpose, the entirety of his soul and his sword power, requiring a single step further. Should a scintilla of pride and might dwell upon the tip of the greatest knightsword? Echidna, Julius. A call improbable to reach. Within impact rendering the passage of time indistinct, however, the time necessary for each convergence of swords was less than a fraction of a second. This was the offense and defense of this momentary world. In that space, much less, in the midst of a battle being fought at the risk of life and death, nobody's voice could possibly reach Julius. However, the voice certainly swinged Julius. Perhaps not his eardrums, but it instead had reached something far deeper within, the innermost depths of his chest. Given he had resolved in his heart to wear the shell-named knight, he must respond to it without fail. That is why, hearing the voice he could not possibly have heard, Julius turned towards the one whom could not possibly have viewed, and exchanged gazes with those pale cerulean eyes. The luminescence dwelling in those large, spherical eyes had distinctly changed from what it had been just before. Go get him, my knight. In that singular sentence dwelled the one final push of sword power he required. Julius, I.A. Qua. Arrow. Ik. In. Ness. Requesting for one final push, he called to the spirits with whom he had become a part of the aurora with. In order to surmount the white light, beyond which present was the form of the enemy he ought to defeat, directly before him. In order to make the tip of the sword reach beyond the white light. Julius, Uhu Hook. Opening his mouth to an extent unbefitting of him, he raised his voice to the extent of vomiting blood. With an expression possessing the preparedness to die, discarding elegance into the wind, merely ensuring the bones supporting himself did not fracture, with his paramount dedication towards it, Julius stepped forth. Reed. And, receiving the rainbow's aurora intensifying its brilliance, the ambushing white light too escalated its vigor. Furthermore, strengthening their might, the radiance of rainbow and the white light collided vehemently. Julius, ah! That which seemed as though it would subsist for eternity, was met by an unforeseen fall of curtains. Julius, ah! Dumbfounded, Julius noticed the feeble voice spill from his throat. The mutual clash of their maximal powers, its abrupt fall of curtains. However, without halting its vigor, his sword, embellished with the aurora, had directly stabbed through the opponent's vitals. Julius, why? Reed, tch, shit, if this ain't a Boren Indendot. Julius plunged into turmoil, being the one to be blamed for the stab, whilst on the other hand Reed, who had been stabbed, remained calm. Heedless of the stab in his chest, he did not even express a frown. Was that a deed of his tenacious force of will, and if not so, was the anomaly which transpired on the flesh body of that great man the cause? Disparate from the penetration of Julius' sword, a crevice had been yielded in the chest of Reed Astria. And that was not confined to merely his chest. His arms and legs, neck and cheeks, throughout profuse sections of his body stretched wounds akin to cracked glass. Intuitively, Julius comprehended what it was. Originally inconceivable distortion stood corrected. This was a phenomenon of that mechanism. Reed, ultimately, it's about that. The human named me ain't fittin' in any vessel other than myself. Whilst gazing at the palm of his fissuring self, the insight Reed grumbled was correct. Capture fractured due to the authority of gluttony, in the form of pillaging the right of control over that flesh body. Redistria had acquired substance, however, the truth that until the bitter end, this body belonged to the sin Archbishop of Gluttony, Roy Alford, who had become the foundation, shan't change. In other words, the receptacle named Roy Alford was unable to endure the workings of the norm-exceeding soul named Redistria. Its failure materialized in the final phase of the battle against Julius. Julius, then, I'd much rather if you might as well. Read, well, if I didn't get eaten by this guy, I may be punctually gone at it till the end. In that case, it would have ended at the point you felled the eye patch after all, you know? Julius, coo. Read, kahaha. Everything ain't gonna go the way you want, for weak folks. Do you wanna cry now? Tossing the stipulated sword aside, Reed mean-spiritedly laughed whilst revealing his teeth. How come could he laugh that way? As is, his disappearance now was a future set in stone. Instead, had he defeated Julius, he may have possibly been able to once again walk his lifeline, which had terminated once. Even though he had let that possibility slip through his hands. Reed, are ya a fool, you? Something like livin' once gain, who the hell's gonna do something that troublesome? First of all, the hell's gonna happen if I run into me somewhere, Julius, I'm sorry to say, but you have already passed away due to old age multiple centuries ago. Even if your present self were to walk around, for your former self, that would be. Reed, ha. Then, are you worshipin' the mug of my kid's kid who's like an outsider or something? Bullshit. Treating his own descendants as outsiders, his recent remark seemed to be his true sentiments. Appearing to earnestly not possess any interest in a second lifeline, Reed crackled the bones of his neck. Reed, first of all, the hell you tellin' me to do after comin' back to life, hey you? Like, playin' round with the fiercely frizzlin' who passed by earlier, though the hottie over there's pretty nice too. Then there's also that woman with an erotic look. Julius, oh, so do you truly possess no lingering attachment? Reed, nah damn it. Doin' what I wanna do when I think I wanna do it as my style. You too, would have been much easier should you do that. Julius, my gratitude for the advice. However, that would instead be much more of a thorny path for me. His self chose to willingly wear the shell. Deceiving himself, or acting as though a part of his foundation was a separate article, would also be apt labels. Having realized the choice was befitting of his self, that it aligned with his wishes, even if Julius perceived Reed's extravagance to be dazzling, he shan't opt for it. Hearing that response of Julius, Reed snorted his nose in annoyance. Subsequently, the wound on his chest, the crevices born as a result of transcending bounds, the solitary wound differing from those he touched with his fingers. Reed, don't you misunderstand, Kay? Your sword reachin' was a fluke. Had this been my body, something like you wouldn't even be left able to rub snot onto others. Julius, I would not do such a thing in the first place, though. Reed, ha! How borin'. Spitting out, Reed knocked Julius' shoulder with the hand he had touched his chest with. Whilst stiffening his body upon that impact, Julius took in a deep inhale. Not yet had he accepted or reacted to everything. However, he deemed letting these moments free by merely losing his presence of mind upon the occurrences before his eyes and experiencing turmoil to be far more unendurable. The crevices dilated, the end was already visible. Hence, Julius hoisted his own night sword he had unsheathed before his visage. Julius, from the bottom of my heart, I revere your sword power. Reed, I ain't needin' a bastard's admiration. I take my leave with my victory, Julius. Julius? With his name vocalized in his final pronouncements, Julius gazed in wonder. However, as per the resolve in his heart to not be flustered, he concealed that astonishment behind a smile, and bowed. Just as he had confidently named himself, before this legendary being, as the utmost finest knight. Just as the ideals of Julius Jaculius were molded to not bring shame to his admiration. Julius, yes, until the very end. It is your victory, Redistria. Reed, ha, now that's a nice face, damn dejected loser. With those words marking the end, the crevices of Redistria dilated. Unlike their visual impression, the crevices which dilated until the very end were not accompanied by sound. Unlike the shattering of glass, the great man of red hair was extirpated like diminishing light. In his stead, collapsed onto the clear floor was a young boy of a petite build, with distended cold eyes. One who ate the memories and names off others and handled them per his will, bizarre eating and a blasphemer. The sin Archbishop of Gluttony, Roy Alford, had collapsed, scuppered. Roy. Indistinct whether he was alive or dead, Gluttony remained immobile with not a single twitch. However, identical to Reed, he merely had the deep gash on the left side of his chest, its fatality incontestable. Ascertaining merely so with his eyes, Julius lowered the knight sword he had hoisted as a demonstration of honor, sheathing it into the scabbard he wielded, and turned backward. The aurora unfettered, in Julius' environs were 6 spirits with augmented brilliance. Without the strength of these girls, who had bloomed into maidens from buds, the one to be lying on the clear floor this way surely would have been his self, rather than the opponent. For that, he must convey his gratitude and appreciation conscientiously. However, with apologies to those girls, he must defer the demonstration of gratitude. Steadily, Julius advanced. Ahead in the direction he was headed, intently watching Julius, was a gorgeous, slender, petite female with pale cerulean eyes. Undulating light purple hair, the personage adorned with a white outfit unfitting for the sand dunes. By her feet was a white fox, with the pupils of its eyes wavering in suspense. The form of her, who had always been miming as a scarf, the significance of its presence there. Once again letting himself be aware of that, Julius closed his eyes. And Julius, pleased to meet you. The statement he had conveyed to the sword scientist, a challenger heretofore, he expressed once again. But, the sensation deep within his chest in these moments, differed from the enhancement preceding battling. However, there also existed something, which remained the same. As though the opening of a new page in a tale of adventure, the adventurous heart of a youth yearning for the night. I am. Kneeling at that spot, Julius articulated the first words and the other person responded. His stance remaining lowered, Julius awaited the upcoming words. He reckoned he could wait for however long a duration. What felicity this was, to have faith that should he wait, he would assuredly hear her words. Anastasia, I am Anastasia Hashin. Julius. Anastasia, I want everything in this world. So, great and cool Oni-san, what's your name? With elegance, she smiled, and he could perceive exactly how she must have tilted her head afterwards. Remaining knelt down and his face lowered and concealed, saying how Julius took a short inhale, and Julius, I am Julius Juculius. Your one and only knight. Anastasia. Julius, you may have forgotten. However, I am one who has devoted the sword to you. One who dedicates the entirety of his strength for you, and aids your will. A respectful bow with the knight's sword placed on the floor, for by Julius at last raised his countenance. Before him, no matter what gaze should his lord have, he shan't regret. It is unbefitting of a knight, to lose his presence of mind, be confounded, face downward. For the very existence who put up appearances the utmost, and sought to possess a cool and charming air, was whom Julius admired and yearned for. And looking down upon that Julius, the young girl narrowed her spherical eyes. Anastasia, really? I don't remember though. But Julius. Anastasia, at the first glance, I thought. That I gotta make this Oni-san mine. At such proximity, were the blazing, sparkling eyes of his eternally craving lord, revealing the intent to not relinquish anything and everything. To the greed seeking to obtain everything, Julius Juculius devoted his sword once again. A sublime play, like the tale of a lord and knight in fiction. The restoration of the plundered bond of lord and retainer was realized in the second layer of Electra. That was, the accomplishment of eliminating one of the 5 obstacles set forth by Natsuki Subaru. Great Library Pleiades, the second trial hereby concludes. Chapter 86, Conversing of what yesterday held. Since long before, she had harbored misgivings. Her lord, whom she devoted her allegiance to, Roswell L. Mathers, for the purpose of achieving his ultimate goal, killing the dragon who safeguarded the kingdom of Lugnica, was necessary. She was a vital and indispensable piece for that plan of Roswell's, for Ram to have heard that from none other than himself would be an event that occurred close to 10 years in the past. The village of the Oni clan blazing scarlet, having saved Ram, and from there, Roswell sought recompense. And, in exchange for retribution for the Oni clan, Ram decided to pay that compensation. That she shall thus cooperate, let it be for the plan to kill the dragon or whatever else. But merely for a singular point was Ram unable to find the answer within herself, that being the essential way of killing the dragon. It was not easy. Even if plans were to be meddled around with and measures were to be taken, that was not easy. Should that moment arrive, simply what would Ram be able to do? You will know when the time comes. Your role, which only you 2 elder sister and can fulfill. She felt she had once heard such words, which had been chipped off. Curiously, she had never given deep thought to what that meant until today, but it is finally understood. What Roswell-sama was aiming for. All of Roswell's actions were for the purpose of the ultimate goal he had clasped throughout his long lifetime. For that purpose he had concealed himself deep within the kingdom of Lugnica, for that purpose he had saved Ram, and, for that purpose he had put a check on Sanctuary as a touchstone, for that purpose he had tested Natsuki Subaru. Even Even if he inevitably had to alter his original scheme, all of the preparation until that point had not been futile. No, he would not let it be rendered futile, that was who he was. Hence, the answer came forth within Ram as well. The reason why Roswell took custody of a pair of young Oni elder sister and they had been taken in as substitute for Ram's lost horn. The elder sister and that were Ram, and, with the two of them acting as a single Oni, he had taken them in his hand for killing the dragon. Naturally, not even Roswell could escape from the effects of the authority of gluttony. As a matter of consequence, he too must have forgotten why he had been taken into his mansion. However, even if he had forgotten, he must have immediately discerned his own self's aim. And, whilst observing Ram and the others make strenuous efforts to recover from the damage of gluttony, he did not disclose the truth. Honestly, he is so. His scrupulous nature won't change, isn't it? Though his plans had once suffered a setback due to Subaru's actions, he yet resumed his handiworks for fulfilling his goal behind the scenes and whilst remaining vigilant for a chance to strike. A nuisance of a nature. Wonder what he must be doing about now, when Ram was not there to watch him. However, so she thought as well. That, in this journey, by the point of having allowed Ram to accompany Subaru and the others as they tried to save, could Roswell have perchance foreseen the possibility of things turning out this way? She may be overthinking. To begin with, the appearance of the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony in Pleiades' watchtower was an unforeseen circumstance, and there was no way he could have possessed confidence in Ram and being placed into a hazardous situation. This may have been an excessive misapprehension on Ram's part, an overestimation of the man she dearly loved. However, it feels far better to believe that the man you love placed trust in you anyways. That he thought, should Ram be there, and the other members will remain safe and protected. That he thought, if need be, Ram would take notice of the supposition Roswell had concealed, and by her volition would turn over the trump card for the purpose of killing the dragon, that he bore such faith. That the man named Roswell Ella Mathers had acknowledged the 10 years of the woman named Ram, to believe so felt far, far better. That is why. Ram, right now, Ram truly feels the greatest she ever has. Kindly get knocked down. The accomplishments established by the Fist King Neji Rakuard is a noteworthy narrative in the Gladiator Island Jinnenhive of the sacred Wallachia Empire. No, once had been a narrative. Having been met by the tragedy of the authority of gluttony, now with both sides of name and memories plundered, there existed not anyone anywhere who knew of the achievements established by him as a gladiator. On the Gladiator Island, wherein strength was used for exhibition, Neji, solitarily, using his empty hands as weapons, survived hundreds of death duels, and finally attained the right of liberation from slavery. Conceiving the refined fighting spirit in his fists, intercepting swords and daggers, before his fists, which shattered steel whatsoever obstacle was equivalent to a maiden's soft skin, he likely could have been termed as the one to have beaten the most humans to death in history. With his inordinately brutal nefarious techniques, the carnivorous beast Beli Hainelga is a rare serial killer who made the holy kingdom of Gastico shudder. No, once had made it shudder. Having been met by the tragedy of the authority of gluttony, now with both sides of name and memories plundered, the vast counts of misfortune and precepts he yielded as a murderer remained not in anyone's memories. By birth, Beli displayed abnormal growth, and acquired strength of physical body impossible to be realized in average humans. And, embracing the men of his liking to death, he piled up copious atrocious crimes. Superhuman strength which his enormous build materialized, and sturdy skin which sustained not a single scratch from swords and daggers. This murderer, who sought touch and warmth, was one of the most dreadful criminals feared along with the Baal Hunter. The career history of the Leaper Dorkal is eccentric. Formerly a merchant living in Kararaji city-states, Dorkal is a deviant who disengaged from his path upon hearing the voice of something not human so he had once been. Met by the tragedy of the authority of gluttony, now with both sides of name and memories plundered, the truth of him having become a laughingstock for many as a deviant vanished, with there no longer being anyone remembering that. One certain day, Dorkal discarded away his life including his wife and children. And, opting for the path espousing that which did not exist, he became a freak who chose to have contact with the witch cult. Though Dorkal manifested a paramount power differing from magic, it deviated from the doctrine of the witch cult, a heresy within heresy banished even from the witch cult. In other words, they were transcendental beings from the kinds of enigmatic persons, eccentric persons, and deranged persons. Impossible to be competed against by ordinary humans. Furthermore, they remained unfinished by the mere virtue of being themselves, and blended together with all possible kinds of memories within gluttony, had been finished into articles of greater superlativeness. What would be the consequence should Neji Rakuard obtain Beli Hainelga's endurance and Dorkal's ability of phantom teleportation? It will be the fruition of a singular brutal, fiendish, atrocious existence seldom seen throughout time. Until now and amongst all of what yesterday held, the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, Lay Baton Katos had not achieved that. For within the grand hot pot named his self, by blending all probable kinds of memories together, he feared the very existence named himself being taken into the hot pot. However, even if he were to drink up the contents of the mixed hot pot, he shan't be taken in at the very least. That was what Batten Kato's notion came to be. And since it had come to be so, he experimented what all he had never ventured to do until now, possessing not the slightest of qualms or hesitance for breaking through the established bounds of his own self. For the gourmet who utterly ate every possible kind of excelling, transcending talent, history, potentiality in this world, all until the very horizons of gourmet delicacies, and persisted in amassing it all within oneself, is precisely whom lay Batten Kato's was. Thus on this day, what was born in the tower situated at the eastern edge of the world, was a warlock agglutinated with every technique and odd talent, regardless of heredity and posteriori. The warlock possessed arms which destroyed all, possessed a flesh body which did not accept any type of attacks, possessed magical arts which rejected and countered back any possible technique, and was endowed with even the wisdom, genius, and intellect, grasping everything that existed. No matter how extensive a survey should be taken of history, never had there been a being who excelled in every single kind of ability to this extent, and neither will any other take birth hereafter, for thousands of years to come. This was a selection of the world's possibilities, brought forth by the abominable calamity referred to as a witch factor. Born from the grand hot pot which condensed solely excelling articles, the supreme gourmet delicacy itself. Ram, you shall be given 3 chances. With that rare existence before her, the young girl with peach-colored hair uttered with 3 fingers raised. The young girl, bleeding from her forehead, with an icy gleam in her light crimson eyes. She was in a condition wherein wounds covered her entire body, and multiple spots of her slim build had sustained tremendous injuries which would impede in movement. Even aside from those, there existed a mountain's worth of reasons why she should not be able to stand up. He was aware of that. The prime cause not being wounds or blood loss, but that her petite body failed to function as a vessel for accepting the existence named herself. Truly heartrending, he ruminated so. Ram, 3 times, you shall be allowed to strike first. There is something Ram would like to test. Exceptional, is it not? However, such deep emotions concerning her not in the slightest, the young girl asserted so whilst 3 of her fingers remained raised, as though to instigate this side. Thrice, a deathly verdict. To begin with, even once would be implausible for her to endure. And neither did he possess any particular reason to disregard that avouch. He not at all contemplated whether this was a trap, either. For the young girl was not one who would meaninglessly proffer such negotiation. He merely thought he must earnestly impart to her that unbridled confidence brought about the destruction of oneself on instances as well. That upon being taken into the same grand hot pot, there shall also be things understood. Lei Nisama, stand by. Vehemently, making his hind legs amassing strength erupt, he hammered a blow as per wish. That was a strike crammed with the Fist King's technique and finesse of destructive force, possessing far too excessive might for the destruction of a solitary young girl, and it was absorbed by well-featured visage of the young girl. Ram, now, first. Lei, Huck. During the moment he conceived he had captured her with certainty, the face of the young girl evaded the fist from a vicinity seemingly close enough for Lanugo to graze past. And positioning her hand on the stretching arm, her fired knee strike smashed the right arm from the elbow. An improbable happening. The tenacious flesh body, even the slashes of the heavenly sword, could not penetrate into its stretched arm, and the joint of the elbow by kneeing into the fixed point that existed solely at this locus, were destroyed by the young girl. However, with the impact of the fractured right arm as is, he fired his left foot up towards the young girl's visage. Though not reprisal for the arm, this side's own fired knee aimed for her face as well. The lengthy, slender leg, the fair knee smashed and crushed the young girl's tender snout, ruining her gorgeous visage. Ram, second. Upon hearing the utterance vocalized by those slim lips, he doubted his ears. He had executed it such that her mouth would be rendered defunct. However, responding to the knee strike approaching from the side, the young girl moved her hand as though nimbly tracing it, and gently averted its trajectory upward. The fired knee smoothly transited overhead of the young girl as though it had been fired to trace the empty skies from the very beginning. And Ram, third. With his right arm and left knee strike dodged, using the impetus of his gyrating body he fired a rebuff from his left elbow, sharp and solid. Upon making a direct hit it shall crush the young girl's cranium like a berry, and expel its contents out onto the floor of the tower. So it should have done. The rebuff aiming for the young girl's temple of the forehead, was halted merely by a number of swivels of her body. And the young girl, dodging the elbow as if informed of its arrival, grasped this side's face once again with her extended hands. Ram, truly a fool. And, voicing with maximum cold-heartedness, vigorously knocked this side's cranium onto the floor. Twisting, turning, winding, meandering, Batten Kato's changed his form before her eyes and charged, advancing towards her, and upon knocking him to the ground, Ram pointed 3 fingers towards his face. Ram, one who spars thinking he has 3 chances, gets defeated in all 3 of those chances. Should you spar with not even the serious intent to win, then you shall be abandoned even by fortune. Lay, bu, ga. Hook. Ram, thank you. It has been proven. Not even the serendipity of time is now an enemy of Ram. For Ram, the utmost appalling enemy was absurd fortune itself. However, Ram had exorcised that by her own hand, and had made even that prostrate before herself. No longer was there anything to be fearful of. Lay, tsu. Sprawled on the ground, Baton Katos swung both of his legs up, and stood up with the impetus of swinging them down. And towards the approaching enemy seeking to hammer his fractured arm in, Ram stepped ahead, wielding no vacillation. Blood streamed down from her forehead. However, that aching sense of lost boiled Ram's blood from the innermost depths. Ah, how truly infuriating. This sensation, this enchantment, always had she thought of it as vexatious. The odious Oni instincts, warmly welcoming battling, exalting the brandishing of strength, the craving which boiled blood for the purpose of killing enemies who ought to be killed, had Ram always detested. That is why, that night, when the horn sprouting from her forehead had been broken off, she thought she had been liberated, and yet. Ram, how truly ironic. Grousing so, Ram caught the hammer arm and shoulder through the opponent with identical momentum. Casting him onto the floor, she kicked his head, propelling him further towards the interior of the aisle. She could not allow him to draw close to her rear, wherein was the mutilated ground dragon, along with the young girl leaning on the wall. Ram. The young girl who resumed her slumber without change, the horn fleetingly glimmering on her forehead asserted being. Originally, the young girl who remained asleep possessing no will of her own could not have made her horn function, regardless of being a member of the Oni clan. However, even with the actual feeling of that remaining vanished, Ram was twin sisters with the young girl that which is referred to as synthesia, was a substanceless link-off tied between blood-related beings. Having attended to the perpetually slumbering Ram during the past year, Ram too had sensed that existence itself. Not by merely the similitude of outward appearance, but precisely due to the presence of that sensation, Ram had succeeded in objectively accepting the truth of that girl being her younger sister without dissent. However, between herself and Ram, even the synesthesia remained Oshios. Had Ram gotten even a single nightmare, her fright may have gotten transmitted to Ram. However, during this past year, not even once had anything akin gotten transmitted to her. In other words, the perpetually slumbering Ram saw no dreams. Unceasingly, she simply gazed into the darkness beyond her eyelids, merely respiring within a desolate, void world. Thus, it was not but a coincidence for her to have noticed this way of abusing said synesthesia here. Though irksome, it was by dint of Subaru's idea. Because he took up Ram's burden through a queer power and bestowed upon her the strength to fight, she conceived an idea accomplishing the same. Those connected together with synesthesia shared mighty sentiments, or even wounds and agony at times. Though she was ignorant of its principle, this hypothesis was there within a book in Beatrice's forbidden archive which she had once read in the past. That what was termed as synesthesia operated with the connection of the OD between two differing individuals. What was termed as the OD was the source of power existing in the depths of the human. It could also be synonymous for the soul. Though on instances it was also used in place of mana as power for utilizing magic, originally, the OD was the pure property itself that made the human be human. The consequence of having a territory that shan't be trespassed by anyone, that mutually linked those born of the same womb, perhaps resulted in synthesia, so propounded the theory. In the end, it came to be determined as a common belief, and was not something that had been proven. However, since it had been left in the forbidden archive, it surely was not some phony spiel either. Above all else, Ram personally had taken a liking to that theory. To have one's own self and someone else be connected together by birth was a lovely thing. Ram, a multitude of problems were caused, due to that bothersome horn, after all. The impulse of destruction transmitted by that white horn, Ram loathed it. She was exasperated by her environs lionizing Ram as the reincarnation of the Oni god as well. There existed not a fragment of connection between that obscure obsolete being and Ram. Ram shan't deem value in precisely such an entity. Henceforth, to have one's own self and someone else be connected together by birth, independent of such an entity, was a lovely thing. And, if such a connection with someone truly did exist, Ram, certainly, by birth itself, Ram could not have been stopped from loving her. Even as an infant, she shan't pay regard to means for the sake of protecting that bond. For the sake of protecting her, for the sake of admiring her, for the sake of adoring her, for the sake of loving her, she shall surely devote her all. Thus, Ram, please do forgive your Badne-sama, who is making you shoulder the burden at this time as well. By way of synesthesia, Ram shared the burden levied upon her own flesh body to her sleeping younger sister. It was in consequence of having experienced Subaru's authority by herself once. Having witnessed something once, Ram could largely materialize it identically. What Subaru did was an identical contrivance. It possibly coercively connected others' OD with one's own OD, inducing a fairly arbitrary synesthesia. Subaru's side could possibly consign his burden over if he felt inclined to do so as well, but since Subaru was a fool, he would not do so. Contrarily, by taking it upon himself, he endeavored to abate the burden of his allies. Ram, truly a fool. Words she had pronounced toward Baton Kaitos a short time ago. However, despite being the same words, they did not echo the same. What Subaru had achieved through the authority, Ram could reconstruct it with Rem, whom she was connected to through synesthesia. She was oblivious to what had transpired at Subaru's side. However, this would surely serve to ease him. Ram, too, could abscond from the repulsive situation, namely being connected with Subaru for long. In lieu, Ram's burden was streaming towards Rem, Alta. Rem, perpetually slumbering, spoke not. Merely gallantly, splendidly, with the white horn she was made to grasp in her stacked hands, Ram's broken horn that had been fitted inside her wand, with that as a catalyst, she was consigning the mana flowing into her own horn over to Ram. It was unfathomable how prodigious a burden shall be laid onto Rem's body for mediating the expansive mana which Ram required. Therefore, this was a decisive battle of brief duration. Lei ne ase matsu. A roar into time, after having been hurled by her kick, Baton Kaitos rebounded towards Ram whilst smiling. Utilizing the might of the seeming leaper, the magical technique erased the existing distance in between in the span of a blink of an eye. However, even that technique of phantom teleportation was rendered futile should it get viewed in its entirety by the opponent. Ram, you certainly are slow, sluggard. At this rate, Ram will become an old woman. She purloined the opponent's field of vision with clairvoyance. The opponent's focus, eye movements, the part wherein strength was being poured, by synthesizing these she could read the aim with greater ease than reading the mind. Dodging the perforating palm, she reversely twisted all 5 of its fingers as it slipped through. Pounding a rebuff into his throat seeking to give rise to a shriek, she slammed the opponent into the wall with a sharp spinning kick. Lei, Ga. Hook. Ram, although, Ram is cute even when she has grown old. Whilst pronouncing so, she seized the opponent's nape through his clothes and lowered it, dropping him onto the floor by his head yet again. Pelting that face with her heel, she pulverized his snout. Stepping backward and evading both of the arms attempting to grasp her, she belabored him with innumerable blades of wind. Lei, Guy, a. Ram, what an ugly shriek, coming from such an adorable face. His entire body slashed by blades of wind, Baton Kaitos disappeared whilst spouting blood. As ever, his flesh body unremittingly repeated transfiguration. However, solely what was atop his neck, that which she was acquainted with by sight, shan't attempt to transform. She was close to vomiting. Though Ram shall not, because that would be inelegant. Lei. Whilst shedding immense blood, Baton Kaitos artlessly swooped down upon her. Stating unerringly, he was surely making free use of miraculous superhuman techniques. Coalescing the might of multifarious transcendental beings, from the outset, he must be formulating techniques impossible of being reconstructed by anyone. That excelling blitz, specializing in all possible orientations, was shut down by Ram through outstripping violence. She guillotined those monumental techniques of hundreds, of thousands, using might worth millions. This was what the battle had now come to be. She sought not to even come in contact with Baton Kaitos. Her condition felt well. She grew accustomed to it in Subaru's absence after all. She had unfastened approximately 2 more shackles. Likely 50% of her prime. No, since Ram had been very young in those days, aspects of her that had matured were far mightier now compared to Ram back then. And, to not wallow in that might, was Ram's forte. Ram, having the horn broken, was correct after all. If it weren't for that night, she may have eventually yielded to the horn's allurement. Though she wanted to proclaim that to be improbable, she could not ascertain if it truly was improbable. Thus, Ram attested to the present being correct, and boasted the invigorating nature of the path she had walked. Owing to the loss of her horn, Ram lived without having to become the Oni she detested. Ram, to begin with, if it weren't for that night Roswell-sama couldn't have been met, so it wasn't even worth making a comparison. No greater conclusion, wielding that as the answer Ram presented her palm forwards. At the surface of her palm appeared Baton Kaitos, having leapt through space. His countenance, astonished by having the point of his appearance read through, she gripped it tight. Ram, you cannot fly in continuity, isn't it? Have grown tired of looking at your magic tricks. And that face as well. Lei, way. Ram, no waiting. An icy pronouncement, Ram materialized a blade of wind in her palm which grasped the opponent's face. Within that juncture, his eyes, his nose, his lips, his ears, with all possible parts of his face slashed, Baton Kato screeched whilst vomiting blood. With the same momentum, she gouged his face with the blade of wind until it was minced to naught. And, from Ram's palm, who sought to accomplish so, Baton Kato's form disappeared in but an instant. However, albeit he escaped, he shan't be able to escape from the wounds, from the agony, from the reality. Lay, Ayatsu. Whilst squalling, Baton Kato's writhed as he shed profuse blood instead of tears. Whilst observing that, Ram steadily advanced her feet towards his side. Hearing Ram's approaching footsteps, Baton Kato's form changed. The proprietor of a gigantic, burly flesh body. Knocking the imminent fist down, she shattered his knee. Kicked down, Baton Kato's figure altered in order to escape from Ram. The giant of a bearded face, taking a spherical stance, solidified his defense. Kicking his frame upward, she nailed him onto the ceiling with a barrage of fists, gradually transforming what was below his skin, which was the subject of vaunt, into lumps of flesh. In order to kill Ram, who conferred upon him interminable torture, Baton Kato's form altered. The bald old man, the magical technique of phantom teleportation. Whilst pitying the magical trick whose stratagem had already come to light, she caught him, drove his face into the wall, and sprinted as though to whittle his entire frame. Lay, baba hook. Repressed by Ram's prodigious might, Baton Kato's entire frame was pared, retaining no place to escape to. Winding and meandering, his form transfigured within Ram's grasp as though seeking the optimum solution. Suppressing it altogether, Ram grieved for the hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of victims with all of her might. A memorial held via vehemence for those men and women who had been captured by gluttony, and had the arts they forged, the paths they walked, the emotions they loved, trampled upon, slighted and disparaged. No longer would arts, paths, emotions be utilized. For naught was efficacious against Ram. Ram, kindly take your own responsibility, by yourself. Swinging her arm, Ram heaved aside the blasphemer who had his entire frame tempestuously pared. Falling over the floor of the watchtower, Baton Kato shuddered and trembled. Slowly, steadily, gradually, his form proceeded to alter. Having relied on multitudes of memories, his form changed. Ram, long time no see. Ram wanted to meet this face. Though this would make for around the third time doing so. Lay, As she wiped off the blood on her forehead and loosened her lips, ahead of Ram's glance was Baton Kato's. It was Baton Kato's, in the truest possible purport. Not the cunning and wily existence who had, until now, borrowed the faces and techniques of others, but Baton Kato's, who had returned to his own face and form. Regardless whom should one become, whom should one depend on, whom should one resort to, it is impossible to escape from oneself. Just as even upon losing her horn, the actuality that Ram was an Oni did not change. Just as even upon having her memories plundered, the actuality that Ram was Rem's elder sister did not change. Ram, in the very end at least, would you like to try resisting using your own strength? Lay. Ram, by the way, you said something curious on the spiral staircase, didn't you? It seems, you have a younger brother or younger sister, isn't it? For the sake of your younger siblings, how about putting your willpower to display? Collapsed down, Baton Kato's painful breathing abruptly diminished. He had not lost his life. He had reacted to Ram's remark. Younger brother and younger sister, the moment he heard the echo of those words, Baton Kato's breath faintly calmed down. And, steadily, Baton Kato's revitalized his body at his locus. Lay, O-R. O-U-R. Little sister, don't. Ram, don't lay a finger on her, you say? Sorry, but do you think you're in a position where you can make such an insistence? Have you ever lent your ears to someone's plea even once? Lay, but, still. Ram. Distorting his blood-stained, crumpled face, Baton Kato's pleaded with a tearful voice. Upon the call of that poignant yet remarkably genuine echo, Ram slightly straightened her eyes. Afterwards, along with a sigh, she closed her eyes. Ram, will think. Lay Nisama is far too kind. Within the juncture, the moment her gaze went astray, Baton Kato's bequeathed simply those words behind, and erased his form. The spatial leap of the leaper Dorkle leaving not a single vestige behind, the blasphemer vanished from her field of vision. He had escaped. Lay ahahatsu. Ahahatsu. Ahokohahaha. Utilizing the odd talent of leaper Dorkle with freedom, Baton Kato's fled from Ram's territory. No longer shall he consider recklessness like eating Ram. Paying no regard to appearances, he chose flight. Can't win. Can't win. Can't win against that one. Just as he had thought, that one was a monster. How conventional for her to have bought time and returned after becoming more powerful as well. That one was a kind of existence who shan't get atop neither the platter of gourmet nor the platter of bazaar eating. Lewis and Roy, really sorry you too, but you know. Preliminary preparation of ingredients is crucial in gourmet. Whilst pressing the injuries of his entire body, Batten Kaydos melancholically laughed upon his younger brother and sister who had been aiming for the same prey. Lewis had promptly withdrawn from the war front to safety, and Roy too would be rampaging in a separate site about now. If that Oni were to just aim for those two, he would also be able to withdraw at leisure. Since Roy of bazaar eating did not know when to retreat, he may finally die, but it can't be helped. Rather, he had been getting fed up of Roy's bazaar eating. Because that chap laid waste to hunting grounds for his pleasure, there must have been instances where gourmet delicacies supposed to come around to this side had gotten stolen away. No, had what his self feasted upon until now truly been gourmet delicacies. Each and every single one useless. Ah, shit. Shit. Something like that, to think something like that exists, you know. Even though it would have been all good had we not known about it, you know. That was not a sentiment induced by the feelings of a younger sister doting on her elder sister. That was a sentiment yearning for something inestimable, unfathomable, immense born from Batten Kaydos within, in the truest of truest sense, a potent emotion wishing for its desire from the depths of his heart. Want to completely eat that one. With all of body and soul, want to completely savor that one. Championing gourmet, he intended to have eaten all possible emotions and transcending, excelling talents. However, now that he was aware of the presence of the genuine in this world, everything had faded away. All of what the existence named Batten Kaydos, as the sin archbishop of gluttony, had trusted as possessing worth and garnered, crumbled to ruin and transformed into rubbish. Those lavish dinner tables which had been visible with such glisten, had been reduced to sand pits with mud dumplings atop. Want that one. Want it. If for the sake of eating that one, throwing anything and everything away would be completely fine. If for the purpose of eating that one, there would be no regrets in losing all that had been amassed until now. Don't want to savor anything other than that one. Don't want to fulfill oneself with anything other than that one. Gee. Whilst sprinting, vomit leaked out from the edge of Batten Kaydos' mouth. Pain or anguish were not the cause. It was merely unbearable. Articles he trusted to be the finest were not so, and due to having become aware of what was supreme, all of what fulfilled his self was foul. Why, did he regard anything aside from that one as splendid? Commend anything aside from that one. Surfeit anything aside from that one. Simply what of him would be gourmet, should he love anything aside from the truly splendid? That's right, that is right, isn't that right, surely that is right, certainly that is right, indeed that is right, because we wish for it to be right. Gluttonous drinking Sue. Glutton eats Sue. Surging appetite, hunger advancing toward fulfillment, and the outcry from his heart wishing for and imploring desire. The desire to become one, the desire to blend together. If appetite was to intake external existences, then the gluttony impelling his self was superlative love. Love you. Yes. Love you Sue. Nay Sama. No, Ram. We love you. The maximal emotion blooming within his self, whilst he attempted to clamor it loud, his words were abruptly interrupted. The cause was pain, and that it was the incidence of a novel anguish. Checking his cheek, Batten Kaydos ascertained his palm dyed with rich blood. The fresh slash, a wound ripping Batten Kaydos' cheek, who had been heading towards the outside of the tower in order to escape its cause, empty space. Wordlessly stretching his finger to that point, Batten Kaydos observed his finger get cut. In the empty space was an invisible blade. That was the same technique as what Batten Kaydos had displayed to Ram at the spiral staircase. The art of installing blades of invisibility in space was a legendary shinobi technique, but it didn't matter whose memories it was in since he had already thrown it away. The issue was the presence of a blade here, which Batten Kaydos did not remember placing behind. It can't be. Avoiding the blade that had slightly cut his finger, Batten Kaydos attempted to advance his feet further towards the interior. His tiptoes were blown off, and he inclined backwards whilst shrieking a he-hook. And, with the inclining back of his head also slightly whittled, he rigidified his face and stood still. He was enclosed by invisible blades. Lei, ha, seriously? He had shown it to her, merely once. Once in the midst of battle, that too it was an invisible technique, so she must not have seen it either. Moreover, she had not ever practically even stepped foot in this place. Yet regardless, she had seized this side's escape route, and had stationed invisible blades in advance. Lei! Batten Kaitos put his hand, not on his left eye which had been slashed by the blade of wind and had ceased functioning, but on his right eye which was narrowly in good health. Fruff clairvoyance, Ram was jointly sharing this eye. She did not let Batten Kaitos escape. Overlapping with this eye, she shan't let him escape. Lei, hiya. Batten Kaitos laughed. No longer could he do anything but laugh. He had loved. For the first time, had mightily, powerfully yearned for something. He was charmed by that unordinary essence. And Lei, ah. Wait, please do wait. Hold on, a bit more. Just a bit more. Just a bit more, Sotsu. No matter how much Shelley implored a clairvoyance, the voice shan't reach, that was per knowledge. Thus, his frantic calls were not for the opponent to hear. They were for impelling oneself. In great fluster and haste, Batten Kaitos held fast to the wall immediately beside him. He had done something impetuous by discarding away what he had eaten. If only the remarkable genius of the Fist King had remained, he could have overcome this facing no hardship. Deferring those emotions as well, Batten Kaitos struck his arms into the invisible blades. The wrists of both of his hands erupting, blood cascaded out of the mouth of those wounds. It hurts, but pain doesn't matter right now. Lei, please do accept our feelings, Tsu. Please do watch over our wishes, Tsu. Merely pressing his arm spouting blood onto the wall, with all of his strength, he drew letters. With dusky blood, using his small, petite body with all of his might, he drew enormous, gigantic letters onto the wall of the sand tower. Lei, buha hook. And, making his own self stand back, he viewed those letters with his right eye dilated. For those letters of blood depicted on the wall, to reach the one whom he eternally wished for from the bottom of his heart. Because if for then certainly, until the very end of the end, she shall kindly watch over whilst remaining overlapped with his own self. Lei, ah, love why. Before he could reach the end of his words, the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony had been beheaded by a blade of wind. Ram, Fulla. Swinging her fingers, having hurled the blade of wind, Ram whispered merely a single word. Even if the proportion of magic had impact within its range of effect, that power itself did not undergo severe change. Not to mention, if only a slim neck was to be blown off through the cutting ability of the blade of wind, then even the minimum power sufficed. Pursuing the back of Gluttony who had fled, Ram had fired a solitary blade of wind. She had deftly grasped the trace of the desperately escaping Gluttony through clairvoyance. She had employed certain tricks as a hurdle in his path for her aim to be precise, but they seemed to have functioned well for how hurriedly they had been constructed. And, on the brink of the final blade's arrival, Gluttony undertook abnormal conduct. Slashing off his own arms, using that blood, he drew letters of blood onto the wall. Though that which was squalid and dreadfully arbitrary, was malignant bedevilment possessing no worth to even be viewed. At the very end of the end, having watched over the upward soar as those blood letters burled and gyrated, she closed her eyes. She did so entirely because she could not have taken relief otherwise. She had not an atom of obligation that she ought to watch over. The blasphemer aired his final choice. Had he put his life on the line for the sake of his younger siblings, Ram would not have denied him mercy either. However, putting aside the undeniable genuinity of his words, he also used that as bait and deceived Ram, making it also a tool for his own self-survival. He likely did not know the method of restoring what was eaten either. Had he known, he was supposed to have pleaded for his life with that as material for negotiation. He did not. Thus, he had to suffer nemesis. Ram, those who wield the sword fall to the sword, those who cling to evil fall to evil, those who yield to fire fall to fire. And, those who wish for the Oni fall to the Oni, destroyed by what one relies on. That was, the divine providence of retribution Ram placed her faith in. Swinging her arm down, she let a long exhale. Afterwards, Ram turned backwards, returning to the extensively ruined isle. She could not have fought at close vicinity, so she had taken upon herself to be further distant. A vexing sense of distance, hence Ram's gait spontaneously became restless. Dodo Jayuan. Once she made her return by treading through the collapsed wall, what greeted Ram was the cry of a tall ground dragon. That jet-black ground dragon had aptly maneuvered its body and concealed Ram's figure behind. Worst-case scenario, had the one to return not been Ram, then it perhaps intended to act like a shield or so. Despite being in such a tattered state, for it to gallantly abide by Subaru's command, it was truly a ground dragon too good for Subaru. Ram, no, that's wrong. Did you also wish to protect Rem? Ram, yes. You truly are a good girl, Patrash. She softly caressed that ground dragon's neck. It would also be necessary to immediately carry her wounded, injured self to the green room as well. Even the ground dragon who exemplified befitting loyalty could not be made to strain itself with these injuries. Neither did Ram wish to do anything preposterous to the benefactory person, the benefactory dragon of her younger sister. Subsequently, expressing her gratitude to the ground dragon, Ram made her way to Rem, who was being protected behind her. The sharing of the horn's might utilizing synesthesia had already been undone, so no horn was present on her forehead. However, the recoil of having shouldered Ram's strength, commensurate with that of the Oni god, had soundly eaten into that body of hers, such that Ram herself felt heavy upon contemplating the recoil that surely will pay a call upon her soon. But Ram, right now, at this time, anything boorish cannot be thought of. Gently kneeling down at her position, Ram positioned her hand onto the cheek of her perpetually slumbering younger sister. The bond as sisters devoid of actual feeling, now accompanied with a far greater certitude of actual feeling compared to before, she felt lovability and cherishment overflow. With her horn broken off, having lost her might as the reincarnation of the Oni god, she had lived until today. For what purpose did that night of blazes befall? Until now Ram had surmised it had befell for the purpose of making her herself, neither did she consider that to be mistaken. However, starting today and this moment, that changed. The reason why that day, Ram's horn had been broken off. Ram, it was to realize, today, here, that Ram is Rem's Nesama. For she had been able to actually feel, with the contact between the soul and the soul via synesthesia, that they were twins who shared the same world, that they were irreplaceable elder and younger sisters. Ram, more than ever before, Ram wants to talk to you. What kind of a time did you and Ram spend? What kind of a yesterday did you and Ram collect? Let's replenish the devoid reminiscences together. Since time flowed without halt, however many reminiscences of the future could be mounted. Thus, for everything to not evanesce remaining unknown, remaining unremembered, day after day, let's make flowers bloom in reminiscences as many times as need be. Ram, let's converse lots of what yesterday held. The sleeping beauty shan't respond. Although, without letting her chest congeal upon her silence and instead fulfilling it with something warm, Ram smiled. Whilst smiling, with no longer any qualms for her own emotions, she moved her lips. Ram, love you, R.E.M. Certainly, no matter how the time they had collected by the two of them had been, these emotions alone shan't turn traitor. Enigmatically, upon vocalizing what was identical to the last words of the distorted Sin Archbishop, though it was ultimately the same note, it did not echo the same. Those who are unbeknownst to love, and those who live in love, can never echo the same. Never can they echo the same. End of chapters 85 and 86. Good loser.